Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Using Writing to Advance Your Career and Increase Your Income webinar, brought to you by your Vanderbilt Alumni Association. I'm Lauren Oberstead, Executive Director of Alumni and Student Engagement, and I'm so glad you could join us from wherever you are this afternoon. Today's webinar will be wrapped up within the hour, lasting around 45 minutes, with time at the end for questions. Please type your questions as you have them into the questions box, and we'll make sure these are addressed before time is up. We are recording today's presentation and will share a link with you via email later this week. Many of you may know our presenter today as the director of the Vanderbilt Career Center. Dr. Kate Brooks became the new Evans Family Executive Director of the Career Center at Vanderbilt University in June 2016. Prior to that, she directed career centers at Wake Forest, University of Texas in Austin, and Dickinson College. She is the author of You Majored in What? Mapping Your Path from Chaos to Career, and writes a blog, Career Transitions for Psychology Today. She has twice been designated a top 10 most visionary leader in career services by CSO Research and received the prestigious Kauffman Award from the National Association of Colleges and Employers. Brooks has a doctorate in educational psychology and a master's degree in rehabilitation counseling from West Virginia U. Her bachelor's degree is in sociology from Gettysburg College. Kate, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks, Lauren. We have kind of an ambitious program today, so I will do my best to get through it in about 45 minutes so that there will be some time for questions at the end. We're going to cover a lot of topics here, a lot of territory, and it's pretty broad, so I hope that you will find something in here that fits what your need is. I don't know exactly who's here, and so as a result, it's a little bit of a broad presentation. So the goals for today is I really hope that you'll be able to identify your personal or professional goals related to writing and publicity, which you will learn go hand in hand, that you'll be able to create a plan for moving forward with your writing and your self-promotion. We will take some time to explore the pros and cons of traditional publishing versus self-publishing. And basically to accomplish that, I'm going to break down some basic categories of writing and help you determine which is the best for you. Ways to improve your writing and your editing skills, increase your knowledge of the publishing market, and I will present a variety of resources. At the end of this program, we're going to share with you a PDF that will have a list of books and resources that I recommend and I hope will be helpful to you. So let's get started here. I love this quote from Isaac Asimov. If my doctor told me I had only 6 minutes to live, I wouldn't brood. I'd type a little faster. And that just really resonates for me. I hope that some of you feel the same way. I really enjoy writing. It's one of those things that to me is just a lot of fun to do. Even when it's hard, it's fun. So I hope that's one of the reasons that you are here today. And let me look at some other reasons why you might be here. I hope this touches for some of you the right spot. Maybe you're interested in publishing an article in a specific magazine or a journal. Maybe you are thinking about writing a book. That might be for a lot of different reasons, including creating some sort of passive income stream that you could have by publishing ebooks and selling them online. You might want to see your book on Amazon.com. That's kind of a cool thing to have happen. You might be seeking some sort of literary success. Perhaps you have written the next Great Gatsby, or you might be looking at some kind of commercial success. Also, it could be that the book or this writing part is just the beginning. It becomes the anchor of a consulting business that you might want to start around your area of expertise. Maybe you want to change your career altogether and become a full-time writer. You've always wanted to be Stephen King. Maybe this is your time to start. You also might want to build a writing-based website, and we will talk about that. And finally, my favorite thing about being a writer is you actually have something interesting to do when you're eating alone at a restaurant or at Starbucks. You can bring your spiral notebook and you can show up at a restaurant and sit there and write, and people always ask you what you're doing. So I'm hoping that somewhere along the way one of these things interests you, and we'll just keep going here. Now, since you are or you want to be a writer, I think this quote is very important. Fitzgerald said, you don't write because you want to say something. You write because you have something to say. I keep that quote in mind every time I write a blog post for Psychology Today. I have a certain amount of pressure to write a certain number of blogs each year, posts each year. I don't always hit that number. I do my best. But I often catch myself saying, well, I just need to get a post written this week. And that's not the best way to look at a blog or look at what you're doing, because there is that tendency to just say something. I think you want to stop and think first about what is it that I have to say. And that's what we're going to explore here. So one of the things to think about is, what are you currently writing? What type of writing do you do right now? Are you already publishing in certain fields? Are you, a lawyer who's written for maybe the Bar Journal or something like that? Are you writing for your work? Maybe you work in marketing or publishing or an area like that where writing is part of the role. I love this picture on the right. Whoever that person is who has written in all those journals, I hope they're working on a memoir, because I think they've got enough of their life written down now. It's time to turn that into a book. So one thing to think about is, are you a writer, or are you something else who also writes? I'm a career counselor who also writes. I think of myself, my pay has pretty much always come from being a career counselor, not from being a writer necessarily, although I have been able to make a fair amount of money from writing, and that's hence the reason for this program. But be thinking about, what are the topics that energize and engage you? What are the things that you would just enjoy writing about because they inherently hold interest to you? And are you interested in other aspects beyond writing and turning it into some kind of an entrepreneurial endeavor, like not just writing a book, but maybe do you want to design an online course based on your book? Do you want to design a consulting business around this? So these are the things to start thinking about today if you have not already thought about them, because that's how your income stream is going to come with writing. I like this quote from Gene Fowler: writing's easy. All you have to do is stare at a blank sheet of paper until drops of blood form on your forehead. Writing is hard. Even when you love writing, it's hard, and editing's tough. And so you really need to know the why. So let's examine that a little bit. I am going to be posing these questions to you, and they are going to be posed several times. And the reason I'm doing that is because it needs to be cemented in your brain. You do need to know the answer to these. So what, first of all, is your number one goal? Why do you want to write? Is it part of a business plan? Is it the great American novel? Is it the memoir you've always wanted to create? Maybe you've wanted to create something for your children or your grandchildren, about your family or your family tree. Think about, what is my why in this? Because the why is what will keep you motivated. And what need will this writing fill? Either your own personal need, or maybe it's the need of what's out there. Maybe people need to know what you know about a topic. Then you need to think about what's new about what you are saying. What different kind of spin am I going to put on this? And who is this writing intended for? Who's my audience, and why do they care? I have met with a lot of writers who say, my book is for everyone. Everyone should read it. No, it's not. It's not for everyone. You want to narrow your audience down and really think about who does need to read my book. Don't worry too much about pigeonholing. People will get a little nervous and say, well, aren't I making my audience too small if I target? Actually, that's a better way to go. Having a niche will help you have a better idea of what it is that you're writing. And then, is there enough material for the scope of your writing? If you did a really good job this weekend repairing the kitchen sink, and so you would like to write a book about the best ways to repair a kitchen sink, one of the things you might learn is, when you start writing it out, you realize that after about 10 pages, you've said pretty much what you need to say about the kitchen sink. So now we know you've got an article. You don't necessarily have a book. And that's a good thing to know, because you can market that piece wherever you want to market it. And you don't have to try to expand that topic into more than it needs to be, unless, of course, you'd like to write a whole book about plumbing, and that's a whole other thing. And do you have the depth of interest to stay with your topic. It can be hard to write about a particular subject, particularly if you've done a lot of research and maybe you're working in that field and now you just feel like you are so immersed in that topic, you can't take one more minute of it. So you want to think about, is this something that I enjoy so much that I will spend extra time working on it? I will want to dig into it very, very deeply. So the next thing I want to move into now, since you've sort of thought about that a little bit, is let's talk about the business of writing. And make no mistake, writing is an art, but it is also a business, and you need to know the business side of things. You are 100% responsible for your writing career success. You are responsible for getting your work noticed, and it takes strategy, it takes planning, and it takes marketing know-how. Most book deals are made on your track record, not on your potential. So these are some of the key areas that we want to think about. Now, of course, I'm going to go over these very superficially, and I hope what they will do is simply cause you to say, that's an area I need to learn more about, and so I'm going to do some more research and reading in those areas. So the first thing I want to talk about is genre topic, the audience that you're writing to. The second thing I'm going to cover is how to build a platform, and I'll explain what that is. The third thing is the whole business of proposals and querying and agents and editors and how do you get into that field. Also legal or employment issues related to the kind of writing you're going to be doing. And finally, some tips for improving your writing or ways to learn more. One of my favorite writers and speakers is a woman named Tara Brach, and her name is spelled B-R-A-C-H, kind of like the candy company. And Tara Brach is a psychologist in the Washington, D.C. area. She's also a Buddhist, and she does these wonderful YouTube videos. If you just go onto YouTube and type in Tara Brach, you will find her. And she wrote this great book called Radical Acceptance, and she herself talked about the fact that when she decided to write this book, she immediately became overwhelmed with all the things she needed to do, all the marketing. Everybody told her she had to have a platform. Now she has a wonderful platform because she's got YouTube, and everybody goes on to watch her lessons and her lectures, which are terrific. And I'm thinking, if this Buddhist woman who is like the calmest person on the planet is getting overwhelmed by this process, then it's understandable if you're feeling a little overwhelmed. And you may feel that way by the end of this. And I'm just here to say, take it a step at a time. Don't try to do everything all at once. So let's tackle these 5 topics. The first thing is genre. One of the things you're going to want to decide right away is, am I writing nonfiction or fiction? Because those two different categories will have a very strong influence on how you proceed with the process. And if you've decided that you are writing nonfiction, then you want to start thinking about what is my niche. And believe me, I have not covered all of the categories within nonfiction. There's a lot more, including a hybrid field called creative nonfiction. An example of what's considered the first book that was called creative nonfiction was Truman Capote's In Cold Blood. The idea is he took something that was factual, but then he crafted a story around it. And so creative nonfiction is a whole nother area to take a look at. But as you look at these nonfiction genres, you might want to think about, where does my book fit? Does it fit in any of those? And again, as I said, I have not covered everything. For instance, computers and internet's not up there. I don't have crafts and hobbies. There's a lot of other categories. But let's say you have decided you are really good at baking pies, and so you want to write a cookbook about pies. Well, so that's one sort of niche, pies, but now you might want to think even further, is this just a book on pies, or do I have a particular type of pie? Am I going to write a book about gluten-free pies? Do I want to write a book about pies for people on a diet? So it might be sugar-free, or individuals who have diabetes. So you want to start thinking about not just what's the general niche, but what are the sub-niches that I'm going to be looking at. And when you think about nonfiction, you really want to think about, what is my expertise? What knowledge base do I have, and what are my credentials? Now, you don't always have to have the degree to write a nonfiction book. For instance, you might be a journalist who has done a lot of writing or a lot of articles on a political figure. And because of your credentials as a journalist, you can consider yourself an expert in politics, even though you don't have a PhD in political science. So there are ways to get that expertise or that knowledge that's not just about whatever degree you have. So when you're looking at your genre, one of the things I recommend is that you go into Amazon and you type in your genre. So you would go to books and you would go to, let's say, cookbooks, going back with our previous example, and you might type in pie and see what the top 5 books are in the field of cookbooks about pies. You need to read those 5 books. Those books are your competition, so they will become ultimately part of your book proposal, but you also need to know what's already out there. I think that's a little scary for a writer because you're just afraid you're going to find the very book that you wanted to write, and that can happen sometimes, but that's okay because now that you know that book's out there, now you have to say, okay, what's the niche I want to move over to? What's going to be my angle? There's a million books on gluten-free pies, so I'm not going to write about gluten-free pies. Now I'm going to move over to vegan, because I don't see anything about vegan pies or whatever. So you just start adapting based on what you learn that's in the market. So also, as I say that, there's a reference that I highly recommend. It's called The Writer's Market. That's the name of it, The Writer's Market. You can go online and find it. It's a book that is still being printed physically, so you can find it in the reference section of your library. But the best version is through an online version because the links are automatically updated. But The Writer's Market will list all the key publishers, all the key magazines. So if you are a sports enthusiast and you've always wanted to write an article about running shoes, and you know that there's a magazine that might be perfect for your article on running shoes, the Writer's Market will tell you what that magazine's guidelines are for writers. They'll tell you who the acquisitions editor is. They will give you all the information you need to write a query about that. And we'll talk about queries in a second, but I need to cover fiction. So the fiction genre, again, just like nonfiction, has so many different subgenres, so many different niches in the whole thing. And once again, if you want to write fiction, you need to read it. So find the genre that you're interested in writing in. Make sure you have read the top 5 books. So for instance, you may say, I want to write a mystery. But there's a lot of different kinds of mysteries. There's ones called cozies, and cozies is a little nickname for mysteries that don't contain a lot of sex or violence. You won't find in a cozy lots of information about blood spatter or things that you might find in another type of book that's about a murder. It will be it'll be a book about a woman who runs a used bookstore, and someone gets murdered in her used bookstore, and she tracks down the criminal through her knowledge of books. You know, they always have usually have an element of humor. They're often small towns, but the idea is, if you're writing a cozy, that's a specific type of writing, and you need to know that ahead of time so that you don't go out of the box. Let me just show you an example with Harry Potter. I hope some of you have read Harry Potter or enjoy those books. These are all the genres that you can find Harry Potter in. And as you can see, there's different ways to categorize the book. And if you're thinking of writing the next Harry Potter book and you've got this great idea, take a look at this list and which category would best fit your book. And it might be teen and young adult wizards and witches, because maybe you're mostly interested in the wizards element. Well, if that's the case, again, go into this. This came right out of Amazon. I just did a cut and paste. Take a look at that adult wizards category and see what the top 5 books are. Make sure you've read them so you really know this genre. The reason I'm stressing this is your audience has expectations. When you go into a bookstore and you get the latest John Grisham novel, you have an expectation of what that will contain. You already know John Grisham's work. You probably have read 5 or 10 of his other books. You have an expectation. And if all of a sudden you're reading a cozy written by John Grisham, unless you knew that was what it was, you're really thrown off. That does not make sense. It's not what you expected. And what will happen is your readers will write nasty reviews in your Amazon page, and then no one will buy your book. So you really need to stay in your niche. Now, that's particularly true for traditional publishing. There are some different rules when it comes to self-publishing, but think about with traditional publishing, the main thing is most publishers are selling in bookstores, and the bookstores want to know which shelf does this book go on. And they don't like it when there's a book that could be on 3 different shelves. They really want to know where it goes. Let me give you a quick example here of I went to 2 conferences. I'm working on a couple book projects right now, one of which is fiction, and it's a mystery, and it's a historical fiction. And I haven't yet decided whether this mystery is going to be for adults or is it going to be a young adult book. So I went to 2 conferences this past year, both of them held in Franklin, Tennessee at the same hotel. So it was a little bit weird to go to 2 different events at the same hotel. But at the first one, it was Killer Nashville was the name of the conference. And I was surrounded by agents and authors and all kinds of interesting people. Most of them were former lawyers or current lawyers. They were FBI agents. They were police officers, ex-military, and a few people who were writing cozy mysteries. But for the most part, these were some pretty hard-edged people that were writing some pretty graphic books about their topic. This is an example of a bookmark. It's not the actual bookmark, but it's the logo that was on the bookmark that I got. You know, they give you lots of little giveaways at these conferences, and bookmarks are one of those things. So there were agents there were editors there, and all of them were looking for the next best John Grisham. They were all looking for the next best mystery, the next best Stephen King. They were looking for those types of books. On the other hand, a few weeks later, I went to the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators because, as I said, this might be a young adult book. This was my bookmark that I got. Wally doesn't want a haircut. Now, Wally's not going to last 5 minutes at the Killer Nashville conference. It is a very different type of book. It's a different audience. I did not run into any FBI agents there, although if you're an FBI agent and you have an idea for a young adult book, I'd highly recommend you go there because you would be unique. But otherwise, it was mostly librarians, teachers, counselors, social workers, those types of folks. And again, there were editors there were agents there. There were opportunities to advance your ideas about your book and maybe find an agent, but you just need to know your genre because they were a completely different group of agents. Now they might have come from the same agency, but the person representing Wally is not the same one that's representing Killer Nashville. So that's where this becomes very important so that you target the right workshops to go to and writing groups and everything else. So building your platform. Okay, so this book that you're thinking about or the writing that you're doing, it might be articles, can actually be the anchor in a much larger business. This, again, is where your money will come in. You may not make that much money on the book sales themselves. Book selling is a strange business, and it's very hard to predict which books are going to sell well. You may get an advance from a publisher, or you may go the self-publishing route. And it's just unpredictable. But it's actually the gravitas of writing the book and having the book is in some ways more important than the book itself. But writing the book and promoting it is a step-by-step process. You really cannot do it overnight. And so you want to begin your marketing of your book before it's published. You don't want to start marketing the book the day it shows up on Amazon. You want to build your audience ahead of time. And a lot of people kind of cringe might be too harsh a word, but they back away from that. I am by nature a pretty high introvert. So I am very happy in the quiet world of writing, and I'm not so happy in the world of marketing. I have to work hard to extrovert myself and market myself, and I cringe a lot when I publish on the Psychology Today. You know, I hit the send button, and it's like, oh, I don't want anybody to look at this. So you really have to think about what's authentic for you, who are you, and what is sustainable. And you want to think about what is my style. If you're writing nonfiction, am I authority in this field? Do I have a lot of years in this? If I'm writing about medical stuff, do I have a medical degree? Can I position myself as an authority? Or am I more of a niche person? Am I, do I have sort of I think of niche as more of a fashionista, or I have a real interest in some area. I think back to that book or the blog post of Julie and Julia, where the the blogger was cooking something new every day that was from Julia Child's cookbook, and that's how she started. And I don't even know what she does now, but she made a boatload of money, selling it as a movie project. But she did not start out as an authority. She was not an authority on cooking. She didn't have a degree from the Culinary Institute. This was just something she got into, and so she developed this niche from that. Or are you a thoughtful guide? And I think of thoughtful guides as, again, somebody that is knowledgeable, that has researched the area, but maybe doesn't do it themselves. So again, that might be your reporter who has been researching a field for quite a while, and they can guide you through it, but they don't actually do that kind of work. And thoughtful guide might also be if you're a survivor of an illness and you want to write a guide for other people of how to, you're not a doctor, you're not pretending to be an authority on the field, but you do want to help people get through a process. So be thinking about what is your style. And then you want to identify the ways that you can reach your potential audiences and build your brand. So everything from having a website, and yes, I'm totally guilty of not having a website, but I actually have to create one if I want to put my next book out there. So that'll be a project coming up. Even though I don't have a website, I already own the URL for my book title. I own the URL for my name. I own the URL for You Majored in What, which was my previous book. You want to start gobbling up the URLs related to your name, related to your book title. And sometimes you have to play with your name. Sometimes I'm Dr. Catherine Brooks. Sometimes I'm Catherine Brooks. And then the problem is there's just a fair amount of Catherine Brooks out there. So you also want to start your social media campaign if you haven't already. Start creating, your LinkedIn page, your Twitter, your Instagram. If you can do a blog, if that's where you're headed, you can start that, but you don't have to have a blog. I had a friend who said starting a blog is like having a baby. You have to actually take care of it. You can't just start the blog and walk away. You are stuck sticking with it. So keep that in mind before you start a blog. You may want to become more active in your professional organization and maybe do some publications in whatever your professional organization publishes. For many years before I wrote my book, I wrote articles for the National Association of Colleges and Employers. I got known in the field. I did presentations at conferences, all that sort of thing, so that when I did my book proposal, and I don't think I mentioned this before, but I should say this. I was 54 when I wrote that book, so I don't want anybody to say age is a factor. You can write your first book at 54, 64, 74. Don't worry about that. Irrelevant. So, but the idea is by the time I wrote that book, I already had a platform. I was able to go to my publisher and say, NACE is going to promote this book. I have a connection with literally every single career center in the country. And so that gave me a lot of juice to be able to go and ask for this book to be published. You're going to want to network and connect in person at conferences. That's another way to get known. Maybe do a presentation at a conference or even at writing conferences. And if you can find opportunities to teach, whether that's guest lecturing, whether it's teaching your own online class, you might want to write short PDFs. I'm sure you've gone to a blog site and the person who runs the blog site says, hey, send me your email address and I will send you my 10 tips for whatever. Well, what they're doing, as you well know, is they're collecting an email list that they hope to, when they write their next book, be able to send you an email and say, hey, you got my free PDF. Would you like to buy my book? And they will be going to their potential publisher and saying, I have 10,000 email addresses right now of people who are interested in my topic because they were interested enough to download my PDF. So that's what's going on there. And then finally, any kind of public speaking opportunities. So as you can see, this one slide is probably a 4-hour presentation right here. There's just so much that you can do to start building your platform. And in case you hadn't figured it out, you are already an author. You're already an entrepreneur. I like this quote, entrepreneurs create value from ideas. Writers are the ultimate entrepreneurs. So you are an entrepreneur. It's not just a book. It's a lot bigger. Going to share with you a website by Jane Friedman. She works out of the Charlottesville, Virginia area. She used to be with HarperCollins Publishing, and she has a wonderful website. If you're looking for support in writing, she offers lots of things for free. She also teaches some online classes, including one of the great courses, and she will coach you in your books. I have not used her services, but I have heard wonderful things about her. There are lots of people out there like her. So I would encourage you to look for book coaches, book sites like this where you can download a lot of information for free. So I want to cover here quickly the whole agent editor query proposal thing. I probably should have moved one of those bullets up earlier, the one that says don't contact the agent until you have your proposal or manuscript ready. It's one thing if you're at a conference and you have a 15-minute appointment with an agent and you want to just talk about your project. That's fine. But generally, when you approach an agent, these are business people. They are going to make a commission or a certain amount of money off of what they can sell. So they don't want to sit and listen to your 20-minute thoughts about it. You want to go and you want to be able to tell them what you're doing, what your project is, and if at all possible, have your manuscript ready for them. Because if they ask you for it and you have to say, I'll get back to you in 6 months, that weakens your chance of getting work with them. Of course, you can always go back to them and you can say, hey, you and I spoke 6 months ago at this conference and now my proposal's ready or now my manuscript's ready. But I highly recommend you have that stuff ready so that you can say, I will send you an email tomorrow and I will attach my proposal or my manuscript. And that's an important distinction. Fiction, you have to have the book written, completely written, and then have your short pitch that you're going to use in the query to the agent. You either query them in person or you query them in email. But the idea is you start with a query of the kind of the elevator pitch of what my book's about, and then you wait for them to ask you to send them the manuscript. With nonfiction, you don't need to write the whole book. In fact, don't write the whole book. You only need to have 2 or 3 sample chapters, but you have to write a proposal. And the proposal is, what's the summary of my book? Who am I as the author? Who's the audience? What's my platform? Who can I market this to? Who will be interested in buying it? What's the competition? So remember that you had to read those 5 books that are in your field. What's the competition and what's the basic outline of the book? Those are all the things you're going to want to have in there. And then in terms of how to publish your book, there's self-publishing and there's traditional publishing. There's some hybrids in the middle. But if you want to do self-publishing, complete control of your work. That's the advantage. It's also generally better for the fiction market. You can write your book this weekend and put it out on Monday morning if you want. There's no delay. You are, however, running a small business, and you will get to keep more of your sales. Where the rest of that money is going to is what you might have to pay to have your website online, to have your, maybe if you're getting it printed, you're going to have to pay for the printing costs, that sort of thing. But otherwise, you pretty much get to keep all the money. You will have a major sales publicity marketing challenge, and as I said, you must have a website for this. You get to create your own book cover and title, which you don't get to do in the traditional publishing world. I have no control over my book cover or my title. My title was completely different. My book was called Careers in Chaos Theory. My publisher, which was Viking, said no one will buy that book except one physicist who will write a bad review on Amazon because he'll say that you don't know anything about chaos theory. So they are the ones who created the title, You Majored in What? And I'm very glad they did. Your sales as a self-published author are going to be predominantly online. Bookstores do not carry self-published books generally. And you have to manage the distribution, meaning if you go with one of these presses that requires you to purchase books, you may have a garage full of 10,000 books and you're going to have to distribute them yourself. So traditional, the nice thing about traditional, it's kind of this gatekeeper effect. It immediately gives you a certain gravitas in the field. The fact that a publisher chose your book always carries a little more, whether that's fair or not, it always carries a little more weight. It's generally a better venue for nonfiction, literary fiction, children's books. Most of the time you have to go through an agent, so you will want to query an agent. You're going to have to sign a contract. They will usually give you an upfront fee, and then they will also give you later payments. They'll give you this is the amount we're going to pay you for your book, and we're going to break it into 4 payments, and you'll get them over the next 2 years. You give up your ownership of the work. I do not own the copyright to my book. The publisher owns that. And they may have connections, but you're still going to need to promote on your own. And you will still need to have a platform because you've got to be able to show that people will buy your book. So you're going to need to write that query and proposal. you may end up having to pay for illustrations and other things. So in both cases, as you can see, this platform, the marketing, all of that becomes really important. I want to cover the legal issues, and I promise we're almost done here. I feel like I've been talking a mile a minute. I'll tell you my philosophy. I prefer to ask permission rather than forgiveness. I was married for 27 years to a trial attorney, and he loved to sue people, and he loved to go to court. I don't want to be sued, and I don't want to go to court. So as a result, I always make sure I have done my groundwork. So if your book is work-related, you need to tell your supervisor. If this is something that you do for your living, you need to go up the chain of command to make sure that it's okay for you to do this. You also want to check with your employer's intellectual property department or with their legal division, which may be one and the same, to make sure that the boundaries are very clear, particularly if you work for the government in any capacity, state, federal, local. If you work for a public university, you need to be very careful because not only do you have kind of the normal intellectual property things, it goes on steroids when you're working for the government. One of the deals I made with the University of Texas at Austin, which is where I was working when I wrote my book, You Majored in What, is that I only wrote on weekends and evenings. I never brought it into the office. I did not use office equipment. I was allowed what the lawyers called incidental use, meaning if my agent called me at work, that was okay. Or if I needed to print out 2 or 3 pages, that was okay. But I never printed out my entire manuscript. I never used the University of Texas's computers to write the book. I used my own personal computer. You just get into quite a messy area if you don't follow those guidelines. And then finally, if you're working on a memoir or any kind of piece where the identity of private citizens will be discussed or where they could be identified or construed in any way, you're going to want to run that by an attorney to make sure you're not writing something potentially libelous. Now, however, my big suggestion here is write first. Show it to the attorney later when it's done. Because first of all, the attorney can't really work with what might be or what could be. The attorney's going to want to see what is actually said. But in addition to that, you don't want to censor yourself ahead of time. If you're writing a memoir or an expose or something like that, you want to write the truth. You want to write what the real story is. And then you can show it to the attorney and let that individual tell you what you can and cannot say. I love this quote from Annie Lamott. She says, "You own everything that happened to you. Tell your stories. If people wanted you to write warmly about them, they should have behaved better." So I think that's a great philosophy, and I like that. And so if I were going to write a memoir and maybe write some not so nice things, I would definitely write it first and then show it to an attorney. So becoming a better writer, we are really down the home stretch here. And these are just a lot of different ideas that you can use that I hope will help you improve your writing. It's always good to keep working on your craft no matter how much writing you've done. And particularly if you're switching genres or you're writing in a new style, if you've always had a journalistic style of writing, that may not work if you decide to write this great piece of fiction. And I think fiction writing is a great skill to have, even if you write nonfiction, because you're always going to have to tell stories in your nonfiction pieces. So going back and forth and learning about the different types of writing is a good thing to do. So look for writing retreats. I've already mentioned conferences as a great way to learn more about writing. Online classes. 2 things I highly recommend are Udemy, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, Udemy. It might be Udemy, but udemy.com, and another thing called Canva, Canva, not Canvas, Canva. Canva is a great online system for creating book covers, for instance. So if you want to create your own book cover, go to Canva. And Udemy, if you type in the word Canva in the Udemy site, you will find courses on how to publish your book using Canva and Word. And those courses, at least as of today, were on sale for $11. So it's probably the best $11 you're going to spend. Check out local colleges, community colleges, adult ed programs. If you can't find a writing group, look for meetup.com. Sometimes there's writing groups. If you can't find one, create your own. See if the public library or Barnes & Noble, somebody will let you use a room and start a writing group. You want to enroll in credit-based courses only if you really need the pressure of the grade. I think sometimes that can slow you down. I have a lot of people who come up and say, should I get an MFA? I want to write a novel. An MFA, that's a fair amount of money. And there are online MFAs. There are ways you can do that. But I would look at the courses, and do you really need all the courses they offer? Or could you write your piece in another way without necessarily getting an additional degree? Now, if you want to teach writing and you want to become a writing coach, you're going to move into that as a business field, then an MFA might be a great idea. You might also want to hire a writing coach. Ask to see samples of their writing or the writing of some of their clients. Maybe get the names of some of their clients to see if they have published, just to make sure that, because anybody can say they're a writing coach. So you want to make sure you're getting somebody that's good. And read. Another resource I highly recommend is Writer's Digest magazine. You can go into your nearest Barnes & Noble. I sound like I'm just hawking Barnes & Noble, but that happens to be the main bookstore I use. Go to your bookstore or anywhere that they sell magazines, look for Writer's Digest. But it's also online, and Writer's Digest has a great website with all kinds of online classes and just a slew of support for all the elements of writing. And when I say read, this is one of my favorite quotes here from Stephen King. I think it's the best advice ever. He says, "It's hard for me to believe that people who read very little or not at all in some cases should presume to write and expect people to like what they have written. Can I be blunt on this subject? If you don't have time to read, you don't have the time or the tools to write. Simple as that." So, Stephen King's a little harsh, but I think very true. I'm going to wind this up here very quickly. The art of writing. The psychology of creativity, as I said before, it's not easy. You can get writer's blocks. You can feel lonely. That's where writing groups and finding support can be really helpful. Jeff Gowen is another website to go to. He's got a great bucket system for organizing your writing, because that's another thing that can happen. You can have a million ideas. Always carry with you some way to write something down, whether that's your cell phone or whether it's a little tablet and pen that you keep with you. But you're going to get ideas while you're standing in the grocery line, or you're going to overhear a dialogue in the grocery line, and you just need to write it down. Don't kid yourself. You will remember it. Don't say, "Oh yeah, I'll remember this," because no, you won't. And set up a schedule and write. Dealing again with that loneliness of writing. I love this one. Writing is a fairly lonely business unless you invite people in to watch you do it, which is often distracting, and then you have to ask them to leave. The only time you're going to write in front of an audience is when you're autographing your bestseller. So I hope that everybody has a chance to do that. So this is an exercise that we don't have time to do, but that's okay. It's something that is going to be in the handout that you're going to get here shortly. I would really encourage you to take a few minutes and write down what's the scope of my project, what need does it fill, who's my audience, what's my angle, what's novel or different about what I'm going to write, and when can I start it. So your next steps are going to be, you're going to have to decide. Maybe you need to do some research now. Maybe you're just totally overwhelmed and you just need to go and sit in a quiet corner for a few minutes. Select a topic, decide on what your writing medium is. You might want to map out your platform building strategy, build your website, plan your new business. If you really can't decide, if I've thoroughly overwhelmed you, you probably just need to get more information and write your ideas on a piece of paper. Just put everything down on a piece of paper. Our office does a lot of mapping and mind maps. Do a mind map. Just put down all the different thoughts you have and see how they connect and see how you could organize them. One of the best books in the world to read is Stephen Pressfield's book, Turning Pro, and he differentiates pros from amateurs. And what he says is what we get when we turn pro is we find our power, we find our will and our voice, and we find our self-respect. We become who we always were, but had until then been afraid to embrace it and to live it out. So Stephen Pressfield's a former Marine. He writes like a Marine. He will kick your butt, and that's really good. Another writer I love is Annie Lamott, Bird by Bird. It's a different style. She's more snarky. She's definitely not Marine, but she's great too. So finally, writing is just a socially acceptable form of schizophrenia. I have so many voices in my head, so many different ideas. Things are talking to me all the time. My staff would be happy to share those stories with you. So I just think that It's just the best thing in the world is to even think of yourself as a writer, even if you haven't written anything yet, because like I said, if nothing else, you've got something to do at Starbucks or the next time you're in a restaurant on your own. So I have one more slide I just need to go to, and for some reason it's not letting me do it. But the basic slide was just, that's it. Oh, okay. Well, there should have been a slide that said, thank you for attending. And I do hope you have lots of fun with your writing, whatever it is. Don't let me overwhelm you. I just wanted you to know the total picture with the idea that you can just take this a piece at a time.
Wonderful. Thanks, Kate. So we're going to, in our final minutes here, answer some of your questions that you all have wonderfully put in the box. So stand by 1 second while we pull those out.
There we go.
Okay, everyone. First question for Kate is, what is the best way to connect with professional organizations and publications? Do I pitch a piece, or what? Do I ask what they need first?
That's a really good question. And so most professional organizations have a division that handles whatever publications they do. So it might be their newsletter or it might be their journal. Newsletters are a lower hanging fruit. They're usually easier to get an article in than, say, the journal. That may, depending on your organization, that might require that various people read it and there are other reviewers. With NACE, which was my organization, what I did was I started with the regional organizations because they put out a newsletter. I started by writing for the regionals, and then I parlayed that into asking NACE if I could write an article for them, and I could write something in their, they have a blog now. When I started all this, it was back in like the 80s, and so as a result, nothing was online. So everything was printed, and it was a much more difficult process. You can just email them and say, make sure that you're a member of the organization if possible, or that you have something that's relevant to that organization. And you should read a few issues ahead of time to make sure you know what's in their newsletters. But once you've got a feel for it, just query the person that will be on their website as the editor or the acquisitions person, and just say, I'm interested in writing for your blog, or I'd like to write a blog post for you, or an article, and this is my topic, and this is what I'm going to do. It'll be approximately X number of words, and ask them if they're interested. The worst they'll say is no.
Great. And I think you've touched on this, but someone said, if I'm not interested in writing a book, but I'd like to do more career-based writing like LinkedIn essays and such, did you have any other?
Yeah, well, LinkedIn's a great way. You can, you've got this platform right in front of you that you can reach the world. And so I think the trick with LinkedIn is, you can go to your site and you can just click on post an article. And so I would advise you to, have that read by several people, of course, before you post it. Definitely give yourself at least a day away from your writing. Write your idea and then let it sit for a day. Look at it again, edit it. You want whatever you write to go out very professionally. You don't want it to contain spelling errors. And I say that as someone who constantly posts on Psychology Today and then 5 minutes later has to go in and correct the spelling errors, because you never see, there's always an error you don't see till you publish it. But you want this to be an example of your best work. But LinkedIn is a terrific way to get started. It's like having your own blog without all the hassle of having a blog.
Next question deals with someone who is finishing up their PhD dissertation and is wondering if there's any way to pivot that into nonfiction writing.
Okay. Well, first of all, congratulations on finishing it up. That's kudos to you. half of getting the doctorate is perseverance, and there you go. So yes, I think what you want to be looking at now is you probably were writing that dissertation for a very specific audience, and I assume it's an audience of learned people in your field. And so now your next question is, who's my audience now? Did I write about something that the average person might be interested in reading? And who is the average person that might be interested in reading this? And so start thinking about their age group that you might be gearing this to, the kind of career field they might be in. Why would somebody in this particular career field want to know about this thing? So for instance, lawyers might want to write an article for the Writer's Digest about the legal ramifications of writing. So you take your expertise and you apply it to a different audience.
Can you also speak if they have questions about ethically, if they're allowed to do that? Should they go to the person in charge of their dissertation group?
Yes, I would start with your advisor. And I would let the advisor know that you've decided that you would, very much like to publish this. Now, it could just be that this is an academic piece and you're going to publish it as an academic book, and you may want to look at the academic presses that are out there to see, particularly, again, if you're writing, a lot of dissertations are on rather finite topics. They're not broad. And so you may find that an academic publisher might be your best bet if you're going to stick with that exact writing. But yes, I would start by talking to your advisor. I would talk to your university. Universities have very different policies about intellectual property when it comes to students. Sometimes they claim the student intellectual property with the idea that, hey, you were using our computers, you were using our library, you were using our research laboratory, whatever things you might have been doing. Other universities have a policy of, no, the student's work is the student's work. But it varies. So I would definitely talk to your advisor, the chair of the department, and then maybe going to the intellectual property folks at your university.
Great. Okay, we have time for one more question, which I'm sure it comes up often, which is, how big is the risk of sharing your writing with others, such as agents or people at conferences, and having your work stolen? Is there someone you shouldn't trust, or should you copyright it first? Should you not worry about that?
Okay, that's excellent. That gets at the heart of a lot of writers' fears, and what a great question. You can generally trust agents. They're in the business to sell your property. They're not interested in stealing your property and giving it to another writer. That generally will not happen. So I don't worry about agents. And also, you're not just going to be sending it to an agent. You're going to be sending the query first, and then if the agent bites and says, yes, I'd like to see your work, then you send the work. So there's a layer of protection there. Anything you put in writing is automatically copyrighted, but it doesn't hurt to send it in with the copyright on it and the copyright symbol and the date and your name, with the idea that puts an extra layer of protection on it. But the way copyright laws are, something that you write is copyrighted just by virtue of being copyrighted. There was a time when you would mail it to yourself, and it was kind of a strange system. I don't think they do that anymore. As far as writing groups, my feeling with online writing groups, I've participated in several, and I'll be very honest, I don't trust them. That's a place where I'm probably not going to put out my best work or work that I care about. I'm going to be more of a lurker. I'm going to be somebody who takes the information and the class that's online, but I may or may not share that much about my writing. I am not as trustworthy of that group. However, if I have a writing group that's a bunch of people that I meet with every other week, that group I totally trust. If you can't trust that group, that's not a good writing group. So, yeah, I am a little cautious online, but in person, no.
Thank you, Kate. This is fantastic advice. Thank you for this wonderful presentation and for all of you for participating. Be looking for an email later this week. We will send the PDF that Kate alluded to along with the link. So that has helpful resources for you, and it'll be the link of the archive of this webinar for you all. We are always looking to improve on our offerings to alumni, so there'll also be a request for feedback in that email, and let us know how we can best support you. Thank you again for joining us, and have a wonderful day.